You know, they say history is written by the victors. But if you look just beneath the surface of so many conflicts, you find stories that were deliberately buried. So today, we're going to peel back some of those layers. We're going to look at documented cases where the rules of war were broken, where finding justice was an uphill battle, and where the official story, well, it was a world away from the truth.
So here's how we're going to break this all down. First, we'll get into the specifics of the incidents themselves. Then, we'll look at the official cover-ups that almost always seem to follow. After that, we'll dig into the aftermath, the so-called justice, and why it so often fails. And finally, we'll tie it all together to see why this is a pattern that just keeps repeating.
All right, let's dive right in with what actually happened on the ground in a few specific, well-documented cases. You're about to see just how fast things can spiral into absolute tragedy. So our first stop is Vietnam, February 1970. Tensions are just through the roof. A Viet Cong ambush had just killed 9 U.S. Marines, and in response, a lieutenant sends out a 5-man patrol. His orders were chillingly clear: get revenge and even the score. What followed became known as the Son Thang massacre. But when this patrol got to the little hamlet of Song Thong, they didn't find enemy fighters. What they found were 3 small huts with only women and young children inside. But that didn't matter. The team leader gave the order to shoot. They went from one hut to the next, and when the shooting stopped, 16 people were dead, 7 women and 9 children.
Okay, now let's jump forward 40 years. We're in Afghanistan, 2010. In a small village called Kataba, a family is having a party. They're celebrating the naming of a newborn baby. But in the middle of the night, that celebration turned into an absolute nightmare when U.S. Army Rangers raided their home. The head of the family, a local police commander, heard the noise and went outside with his teenage son to see what was going on. Snipers shot them both immediately. In the total chaos that erupted, Rangers stormed the compound and killed 3 more people inside. 2 of them were pregnant women. The third was a teenage girl. A celebration ended with 5 dead civilians.
As horrifying as these events are, what comes next is often just as disturbing. And that's the cover-up. So now, we're going to look at how the official stories fed to the public can paint a picture that is just completely false. And this is where the story takes a wild turn. After that raid in Kataba, NATO actually put out a press release. They claimed their soldiers had stumbled onto a gruesome scene of an honor killing. But the survivors, they told a completely different story. They said they watched American soldiers use knives to literally dig the bullets out of the women's bodies, trying to hide the evidence of what they'd done.
And we see this exact same kind of thing back in Vietnam. The patrol from Son Thang, they came back to base and flat out lied. They claimed they'd gotten into a heavy firefight with 15 or 20 Viet Cong soldiers. But that story completely fell apart the very next morning when local villagers told another Marine patrol what really happened. Now, this instinct to cover things up, it's nothing new, and it goes all the way to the top. This takes us back to World War II, to something called the Chinogne massacre, where American soldiers executed around 60 German prisoners. And get this, General George S. Patton knew all about it. He wrote in his personal diary that his men had murdered about 50 Germans, and then he added, "I hope we can conceal it."
So you have the incident, then you have the official story. But what happens when the truth starts to leak out? Well, let's move on to the reckoning phase and see what kind of consequences the people responsible actually faced. Or didn't.
This chart, right here, it pretty much says it all. In the Son Thang massacre, one soldier was actually sentenced to life in prison, but a major general later reduced that sentence to less than 1 year. For the Kataba raid, even after the military admitted the honor-killing story was a lie, an investigation just concluded the soldiers followed the rules. The result? Absolutely no disciplinary action. And Chinogne? Hidden for decades. No one was ever punished. The pattern couldn't be clearer. Even when the truth is undeniable, real accountability is almost impossible to find.
And this lack of accountability isn't just about killings, it's about systemic abuse, too. Take what happened at the Bagram prison in Afghanistan in 2002. An innocent taxi driver named Dilawar was beaten to death. He was just a small guy, 122 pounds. Guards chained him to the ceiling, hit him over 100 times, and turned his cries into what they called a running joke. A medical examiner said his legs looked like they'd been run over by a bus. And the punishment? Out of 27 soldiers investigated, most got off with a reprimand. A couple spent a few months in prison. That was it.
So when you see all these cases laid out one after another, you just have to ask, right? Are these just a few terrible, isolated mistakes? Or are we looking at something much deeper, something systemic, a recurring feature of conflict itself?
And that really brings us to the whole point of this. Seeing this pattern is so important, because understanding these dark chapters from our past is the only way we can hope to confront the challenges we still face today.
When you put it all together, a really clear and disturbing cycle just pops out. Step 1. A tragic incident happens, and civilians are killed. Step 2. The first reports come out, and they either hide the truth or create a totally false story. And Step 3. The investigations wrap up with little to no real accountability for anyone involved.
And trust me, this is not a new problem. This pattern stretches way back through American history. You can go back to the Maria's Massacre in 1870, where soldiers killed 200 Native Americans, many sick with smallpox, then claimed they were warriors. Or the Shinwar shooting in Afghanistan in 2007, where Marines opened fire on civilians but were cleared of any wrongdoing. Or as recently as the Baghouz strikes in Syria in 2019, where an airstrike killed 64 civilians, a fact the military hid for years.
So all of this leaves us with a really profound and difficult question. And this isn't about pointing fingers or diminishing service. It's about facing a fundamental conflict. How does any nation, when it's at war, balance the demands of military action with the absolute non-negotiable need for accountability and the protection of basic human rights? That, right there, that is the unending struggle.